Hey there, Fletcher from All Things Overlanding here, and today I'm going to be talking about overlanding in winter. I'm going to talk a lot about preparation. I'm going to give you some tips and tricks for how to be able to go out and enjoy winter. I feel like a lot of people don't get out in the winter. They kind of view it as the end of the season, but that's when I start to go the most. And I'll tell you why in this episode and give you some tips for how you can do it too. So if you want to learn more about winter overlanding, stay tuned.
Understand where it came from, but you got it, my got it. It began in the land of the sandstorm. I fought it, though I wanted everything to do with what you give to me. Loosening my grip.
All right, guys, so as I mentioned in the intro, today I'm talking about tips and tricks for winter overlanding. Been doing this for a few years now. For the last 3 or 4 years probably, I've been super heavy into the winter scene. More so than the summer scene. Now here in Indiana, we've got a lot of humidity. It gets really hot. I don't have elevation. I can't go up to a mountain to cool myself down. So during the summer is when I do a lot of like modifications to my vehicle, working on that sort of thing. I still go camping, of course, because I couldn't go 4 or 5 months without camping. So I do still go out, but I vastly prefer fall and winter over spring and summer. So again, let me tell you a little bit about that. Let's talk a little bit about preparation and kind of how you can get ready. And then we'll get into some tips for how to enjoy your time out in the wilderness. So again, depending on where you're going to be, I'm not in Alaska. I don't have an engine block heater or anything like that. That has not been something that I've needed, even when it gets down into like single digits or even negative numbers. Most of the time, you're probably going to be okay without having to spend a ton of money or do a ton of modifications to your vehicle. Now, if you have like a camper shell on the back and you're sleeping in there, obviously the more like insulation you can add to that, the better you're going to be, the warmer you're going to be. It kind of applies to your tent too. Now, I'm a rooftop tent camper. You could be a ground tent camper. There are some people that I think it's a little crazy, but they'll go hammock camping in the winter. But if you have a good underquilt, again, if you're prepared, you can make that work. So, it's going to depend on your type of shelter that you use, how you prepare. If it's a hammock, it may be a really good sleeping bag, maybe a heated blanket if you've got a battery bank or something that you can use to power it, probably an underquilt to keep yourself warm and insulate yourself from the air. If you're in a tent, kind of the same thing, right? There are certain tents that are intended for winter camping that are a little bit heavier material, or you could provide some sort of a heating thing like a diesel heater. You can use a diesel heater with a rooftop tent. You can use it with a ground tent. You could probably use it with a hammock. I haven't done that. But if you have a tube of hot air and you jam it into your sleeping bag, you're probably going to be pretty warm even in a hammock. But so you've got to think about those things and be prepared, right? Make sure that you've got appropriate clothing. Do you have gloves, a hat? Do you have a jacket, multiple layers so that you can layer up and down based on whether it warms up during the day? So being prepared is super important, and thinking ahead to your trip and your type of shelter and how you're going to be warm and comfortable in a cold environment is super important. Another thing that doesn't get talked about a whole lot that you do have to kind of think about is route planning in the winter changes everything, right? So when you're in the summer, you may have a trail that is pretty tame most of the time, but maybe it has a really steep grade. And I'll give you an example to this. I have a buddy with an 80 series. He was on a winter trip one time with a few other people, and they were in Hoosier National Forest, which again, Hoosier National Forest, Midwest in Indiana, not known for any crazy trails. There aren't really trails. They're just gravel forest service roads, right? But in the winter, that changes everything. Traction, it changes the difficulty of various obstacles. And what happened to my buddy with the 80 series was that they kind of came over a hill and then it dropped quite a bit. And it was a pretty dangerous situation where on one side of the road, it kind of fell off. And I kid you not, he said he went for a ride, right? Like he's going down this thing and it had sort of rained and snowed and rained and snowed and it had turned this big hill into a sheet of ice. So his big old Land Cruiser slid sideways down this whole hill, and luckily he kind of came to rest on a berm at the bottom and it stopped him. But then it took him, I think he said a couple hours to sort of slowly winch him up this hill, and then everybody had to turn around. So again, someplace that is normally really tame and maybe just a little bit of a steep hill became a real serious like hazard and potential damage to your vehicle situation, or maybe worse. So when you're going to go in the winter, you have to be aware of that and you have to be thinking about that. Do you have the right tires? Do you have the right, vehicles? Is your vehicle capable enough to overcome some of these things? If you got 3 feet of snow, that's a different situation than if you have 1 inch of ice or no snow, right? Like everything changes based on the weather. So just be aware of that. And you know, you're going to need to slow down your speed if it's slippery, icy, snowy. You're going to need to kind of keep up your momentum though if you're going, let's say, up a hill or something. If there's snow on the ground, snow almost kind of acts a little bit like sand, kind of like there are some advantages to it from a traction standpoint, obviously over ice, but it's just a different beast. And if you lose momentum, let's say if you're kind of going up a grade and you let off because the car in front of you stops or you see brake lights and you stop, sometimes you're just going to be stuck and you may have to winch yourself out. So you just have to be aware of that. You kind of have to drive a little bit differently. You have to plan your routes a little bit differently based on the anticipated weather. And you have to think about those things that, again, maybe you're just really super used to and you think, oh, this is an easy road. This will be fine. This Forest Service trail won't be a problem. But then when you get there, based on the elements, be aware and be ready to change plans. Another thing to think about that I feel like people don't talk about too much is in the winter, it gets a little bit more dire. If I get stuck in the summer, you know, I could probably hike out a little bit, make a phone call, get a buddy to come with a winch or something to try and help recover me, some tow straps, that sort of thing, try and recover me out of a situation that I may be in. Whereas in the winter, it's really, really cold. You may not be able to hike as far. You need to be prepared with clothes, with recovery stuff, with some extra food, some extra water, just in case if you were to get stuck somewhere that you shouldn't be or couldn't get out of, that you have some preparedness and you're not going to starve to death or freeze to death, right? That sounds a little bit exaggerated maybe, but I mean, I've been up to Michigan and Wisconsin in January, February, and had, you know, situations where, you know, luckily we were with like 4 or 5 rigs, so none of us ever really got stuck. We were less worried about it because we were going to be in a group. But especially if you're going solo or maybe like 2 of you, if something were to happen and you would get stuck, or worst case, you would flip a rig or something like that, or, you know, lay it on its side, something like that, then you want to be prepared with additional, you know, food, water, recovery, maybe some sort of like a satellite communicator like a Zoleo or a Garmin, something like that that could allow you to get contact with people if you needed to. That also brings up something that I've said before, which is letting people know where you're going to be. Let them know the rough area where you're going to be at least. If you can send GPS updates, do that too. It sounds a little bit overprotective, I know, but if something were to happen, and the next day you're supposed to be home and you don't show up, it's much better to have your loved one saying, hey, here's where he was last, than, I don't know, he said he was going to Hoosier National. Like, if you have to search a whole forest versus a specific area of a forest, it makes a big difference and it could save your life. Another thing that I want to talk about is, so it sounded a little dire so far, right? So the preparedness piece of it is important, and it is important to be prepared, but it makes it seem scary, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to intimidate you guys. Again, it's one of my favorite times to camp. So when you get through the preparedness part and you just are aware that like there is some chance that something bad could happen, right? Maybe more so than in the summer months because of the weather and the fact that we as humans can't really survive for long periods of time in really, really cold temperatures. And it's going to make walking out a little bit more difficult. Once you're kind of through that and you feel like you're prepared, you've got some extra food and water, you've got recovery gear, you've got, you know, tire repair kits, that sort of thing. Anything that could kind of, you know, help you out in a jam. Then you get to some of the challenges and rewards that come with winter camping. One of which is it's more challenging to get out there. The roads could be a little bit more tricky. The trails could be a little bit more slippery and tricky, but there's going to be less people out there, right? So like versus like summer or fall when you go out and all the campsites are taken and you're driving and you're like, I want to go to that one. Oh, there's a car there. I want to go to that one. Oh, there's a car there. In the winter, it gets really quiet. You don't have all the noises. You don't have people shooting guns as much. You don't have people, dogs barking, and just all the noises that kind of typically come with overlanding. Even in a dispersed area like a national forest, you still have other people there. In the winter, you overcome those challenges. You overcome that sort of fear of the cold, and you get the reward of being out there where it's really, truly peaceful, and you are away from people. And for once, it's kind of quiet and peaceful, and if you're looking for that kind of escape, then it can be really rewarding to overcome those few challenges associated with the cold weather and the different terrain. Another thing that sort of seems like a cheat almost to me is a diesel heater. So 2 years ago, I didn't have a diesel heater, and I've been doing this for like 5 years, and I've been winter camping for like 4-ish years. I would take hot hands with me. I would take a decent 0-degree bag. And I mean, by decent, I mean like a Coleman 0-degree bag. But there are some, you may have to spend a little bit more money. There are some much higher quality 0-degree bags out there that will truly, really keep you warm without the need of like additional aids like a heated blanket or a diesel heater. However, the diesel heaters are very reasonably priced, and I'll put some links in the description down below too. I've had 3 of them now. The one that I have right now is a suitcase style from a company called H Calorie, and I love the thing because I can basically bolt this box to my bed rack, and then when I get to camp, I can open it up, turn on the diesel heater, run a tube up into my tent, and you could be in your underwear in your rooftop tent in 0-degree weather and be perfectly warm. You can, when you wake up, instead of having to get out of your sleeping bag and then immediately being freezing cold, you have like a little envelope of heat. So if you have to get out to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night or take your dog out or do something, then you have a warm pocket to return to get warmed back up, heated back up. Also with the diesel heater, and I won't go too deep into this, but I will just mention a little bit, people talk about condensation, right? That happens with propane heaters. So propane heaters, one of the side effects of using a propane heater is that it does produce water vapor. So when you use a propane heater, you'll have condensation from that, and you could freeze up the whole top of your tent. You could have water dripping in your tent because of the combination of heat and water that's being created by the propane heater. With a diesel heater, it's just warm, dry heat. So if your clothes get wet during the day and you need to dry out, that's another benefit of a diesel heater is in your rooftop tent, you could hang your clothes up, over the string or something on the top of your rooftop tent, and the diesel heater will help dry your clothes out as well as warm you up. So the diesel heater is really a way to cheat it. However, keep in mind that it relies on some sort of a battery bank to be able to power it, or like a dual battery setup or something. You have to have some way to power it, and it can take a lot of power at the beginning when you first start it up. So you have to have the right power bank to be able to charge it. And another thing is there could be failures, right? You could have where it won't ignite, or you're getting an error for some reason and you don't know why. So when you bring that, do not rely on it 100%. Always have some sort of a backup. Because again, in the winter, we're talking about things that are kind of life and death, right? Like you do want to have like a heated blanket or some hot hands, and you do want to still have a good sleeping bag, even though with your diesel heater, you may lay on top of it in your underwear and be perfectly fine. But if that diesel heater won't fire up for some reason, you may have to then rely on your backup to keep you warm. Absolute worst case too, you can sleep in your vehicle. I've done that 2 or 3 times in the last few years where like it just got so cold and I could not stay warm that I ended up getting in the truck, turning on my heated seat and sleeping in my driver's seat for a night. Not ideal. It's not really great to run your truck all night. It's probably not great on the injectors and all that stuff. Also not great for the environment to run a truck all night. But when we're talking about your survival, right, when it's so cold that you could possibly freeze to death, you want to be able to have that truck as a backup to sort of keep you warm. So again, to kind of wrap this up with some tips and things like that, I've kind of been dropping them throughout the whole episode. But the tips that I would give are be prepared. Think really thoroughly about your setup. Think about how you're going to stay warm. Clothes are really important, right? Like if you go out there in jeans and a t-shirt and a sweatshirt and a jacket, you're going to be cold and you're probably going to be miserable. If your feet get wet and you're wearing tennis shoes versus like some sort of waterproof boots, totally different experience, right? So start with your clothes. Anything that touches your body needs to be higher quality, needs to be appropriate for the winter. Wool socks will help keep your feet warm. Again, appropriate boots that are waterproof, that aren't going to get soaked whenever you first hit the snow. Think about all that stuff. Be prepared, right? Have the right clothes. Bring some backups for heat, like a 0-degree bag, maybe hot hands, maybe a heated blanket. If you have a diesel heater, that's even better. But view that as like a luxury item that may or may not work. Now, I've never had one fail me in 3 years. So again, I don't want to make it sound like it happens all the time. But if that happened one night, right? If I went out there and if I get too confident in that diesel heater and I don't bring anything with me and that thing won't fire up for a night, it's going to be a really different experience. It's going to be a really miserable trip. But again, if you have a backup, then you're like, all right, this isn't ideal, but you know what? I'm going to be fine tonight. I'm going to put my heated blanket in my sleeping bag with me. I'm going to hook it up to this battery bank and I'm going to be fine. If you've never been before either, post up in the comments down below if you're on YouTube. If you're on the podcast, go over to my other social channels. Check out the Newbie Overlanders Facebook group, which is linked in the description down below as well. You can ask all kinds of questions. If you have questions, if you're scared, if you're nervous about it, intimidated by it, don't hesitate to use your resources, right? Use something like a Newbie Overlanders. Use something like an All Things Overlanding and ask your questions, and we'll do our best to get you responses based on our experience, right? So let's wrap this up with kind of my final thoughts. Of course, it can sound a little intimidating, and some people think I'm a little crazy for going in the winter, but I promise you, I'm telling you, I've been doing this for years and years. I cannot wait for winter. Right now, it's almost the end of October where I'm at, and I am counting down. I'm like, next month, man, we're going as many times as I possibly can, because it's just so enjoyable and peaceful. And again, if you are properly prepared, you can have a great time in the winter. You can enjoy some really peaceful alone time, away time from sort of the stresses of normal life, and you can get out and enjoy the beauty of nature in the winter, which not a lot of people get to see. I feel like a lot of people kind of shut themselves in. My kids and their friends all kind of get locked in their houses for the winter, and then until spring we don't see each other again. This is an opportunity to get out and try something that maybe you've never tried before, and I think it's amazing. So again, I hope that was helpful for you. Like I mentioned, in the description below will be links to all my social channels. If you want more info, come and hang out on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, wherever you want to hang out. I'd love to have you. But there's more info on all those channels. There's also a link to the Newbie Overlanders group down there, to my Patreon group. We talk about stuff all the time in Patreon, gear and stuff like that. We have a 24/7 Discord, so if that's something you're into, definitely check that out. Also in the description below are links to my website where I've got some funny overlanding patches and stickers, all things overlanding, merch, that kind of thing. So if you're into any of that stuff, you want to check it out, feel free to click through that link as well. But again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Post up your comments down below on YouTube or hop into the other channels if you're on the podcast, and I'd love to chat with you. I hope you guys have a great week, and we'll see you soon.